Yo.
What up, though?
I got to talk. I got to tell what I feel. I got to talk about my life as I see it.
All right, then. It's time for you to bring it to the table.
Turn up your radio wherever you at. We about to bring it.
Street Beat.
Yeah.
With Tony B.
For the next hour, Tony B will give you a chance to tackle local, national, and international issues that affect your community.
Street Beat. Street Beat. With Tony B.
Welcome to this week's edition of Street Beat. It's me, your host, Tony B. We have a very important show for you that we're going to hear here very shortly. My guest, Liz Huizar, talking about Seattle public school closures. Yeah, we'll get into more of the details of what that's all about. But I want to share some information with you first about what we've got coming up tomorrow, Halloween. We will be open for the final day of the Haunted Theater, the Columbia City Haunted Theater. Had a couple of great Saturdays. Now, this is for kids, so basically 11 under, 12 and under. But on the other hand, your 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, they're going to have a great time here. It's not too scary, but really cool. So we'll be open from noon all the way until about 7, maybe 7:30. We'll try not to have anybody show up and then not be able to get into the theater because we've closed. We're expecting a big group of people. So you know what? If you go to our website, columbiacitytheater.org, you can actually get advance tickets, and then that will guarantee you entry ahead of the line. Then on Saturday, we're having a fentanyl awareness discussion. Yeah, you want to be here for that. We'll have panelists talking about their experiences, sharing more information. There is illegal fentanyl, then there's also illegal fentanyl. We'll be talking about all of as much as we can to create more awareness to you about fentanyl. And then, of course, on January 5th, Election Day, we'll be hosting an Election Day special. Juan Cotto will be your host. They'll be here from 6 to 9, giving you updates on the elections. Locally, of course, the very important information to share with you about our local elections. And then, of course, what's going on with the presidential election as well. So that's just a little taste over the next few days of what we've got going on here at Rainier Avenue Radio and here at the Columbia City Theater. So my guest, again, Liz Huizar, Executive Director of Southeast Seattle Education Coalition. Liz, how are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having us.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. Let's start off with this. The Southeast Seattle Education Coalition. Tell us a little bit about what the organization is, what you do.
So we are a coalition of 50 community-based organizations, leaders, partners, all with desire to improve education, have education equity at the forefront of a system that has traditionally left students of color behind. Mm-hmm. So we want to see difference in the system. We want our students to be better served, to come out and be, community leaders. And we have vision of a better system that serves all students.
Southeast Seattle, is that because you're hyper-focused on Southeast Seattle schools?
Most definitely, and that being because this region is so demographically diverse. We have students who all reflect different backgrounds in terms of Black, Indigenous, Latino students, as well as immigrant refugee communities. And this pocket of the city is reflective of a diverse region. And even though the region is changing, it still continues to house a majority of BIPOC community. And so
you're a coalition of 50?
Or so, yeah, 50
partners,
or more.
All Southeast Seattle?
All with ties and connection to Southeast Seattle.
All
I
right.
believe there's that many of us.
Well, yeah. If you are unfamiliar with Southeast Seattle as Rainier Avenue Radio, that's who we represent. That's who we serve, although we do impact and reach out and create awareness among all communities, not only just here in the King County area, but all throughout the Northwest. And even all over the world because of the diversity that we have. Folks listen all over the world. We broadcast in 6 different languages. It's a reflection of our community. This number changes a little bit, but somewhere between 70 and 100 different languages and dialects that are spoken in our community.
which is why we're so excited to be here to share some of this information that we're about to dive into, just because we know that mainstream media serves one community, but in reality, we need to make sure information is shared across various communities. So we're honored to be able to provide that information today.
So there's an open letter that went out that I want to talk about, but I want to start with, are schools going to be closed because of budget cuts? Is that a definite thing? Maybe we'll start there. Are schools going to be closed?
So per the latest announcement from Seattle Public Schools, 4 schools will consolidate, meaning they will come together. 2 different school buildings will come together, and in turn, 4 of those schools will close. They are spread throughout the city of Seattle, so they are not geographically in any one part of the city, but rather kind of throughout. And so the original list indicated either 21 schools closing or 17 schools closing. There was a lot of pushback from community, mainly from northern parts of the city, advocating for no school closures, where Seattle public staff goes back and comes forward with this 4 school closure plan that we have in place, or that we will be working towards right now.
So if I heard you correctly, potentially 21 schools closing?
Originally, that was the intent. In this next school year, only 4 of the original 21 will close.
Okay, so in the next upcoming school year, 4 schools will definitely be closing.
Yes.
Do we know what those schools are, which schools they are?
We do, and I will make sure we pull them, as I don't have them top of mind. But in the Seattle Public Schools website, they have it divided by the 4 schools in the regions, and they also have listed what schools will be coming together. So in addition to, these are the schools that are closing, this is where those that student population will now be at this school building, and we can get that pulled up to share.
Now, you mentioned that there was a lot of pushback from North Seattle.
Yes.
You didn't mention South Seattle.
Yes.
Why not?
And this is part of what our open letter was saying. So as all of these decisions and all of these conversations are being had in Southeast Seattle, information is not making its way as quickly. Originally, Seattle Public Schools publishes a website with decision data that went in to inform this. And that was essentially the only means of communication besides an email that went out to parents through typical email correspondence. And so one of the critiques in our letter is that there has not been enough community engagement, and many folks in Southeast Seattle are still wondering what's going on. Why is this happening? Why is there a $94 million deficit?
How much of a deficit?
$94 million.
$94 million deficit for Seattle Public Schools education.
Yes.
A deficit.
A deficit. Yes. And this is a structural deficit, meaning there is more expenses being made than money that is coming in from the state level. And so what was proposed with school closures would have reduced the deficit, not by full 94 million, but by a portion. Over time, it would have been continued savings. And so, the reality is $94 million short is quite a substantial amount. And that problem is not singular to Seattle Public Schools. There are other districts in the state experiencing similar deficits in their budget, as well as across the country. School districts are operating with holes in their budget.
Mm-hmm. So we don't, at least right now, you can't tell us which schools are going to be closed. But folks in South Seattle, Southeast Seattle, also care about our entire city as well. And so anything that impacts any of the schools in the Seattle Public School District, ultimately at the end of the day, correct me if I'm wrong, affects and impacts all schools. Would that be
100% correct? This is a school district that serves the entire city of Seattle. And so in this list of 4, there will not actually be any schools impacted in Southeast Seattle. However, the way that funding is allocated per school building is still going to have an effect whether or not school buildings physically close in this region. And so that's part of the advocacy. One of the things that has come out in the most recent correspondence is that in addition to those 4 schools closings, there will be cuts made to central office. We don't know exactly what that means yet, whether that is staffing or fiscal facility specific budget cuts, but we know there will be cuts to central office. We also know they will be shifting to a 3-bell schedule, which means there will be 3 different start times for elementary schools. There's no more details than that, but right now we operate on a 2-bell schedule. So moving into a 3rd one means that there would be a new time that parents will be impacted. They will have to drop their kids off at a different time than maybe they're accustomed. And part of that is, again, a savings reason, because now we're paying for less bus drivers and having folks, be able to do multiple routes in one time frame versus having as many buses out there.
Okay, so the bell system essentially means what time school starts.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and this is starting in the upcoming 2025,
correct.
2026 school year.
Yes. So in September of this upcoming calendar year, you parents will see new bell schedules. And again, this is throughout the district. So to date, we don't know which schools are changing just yet, but that is part of this conversation that's being had. And so again, from a very pragmatic, how do we solve this? How do we address this? Most of the conversation has been centered around advocating for state funding and having more funding come into the district. And while that is a definite necessity and expenses have increased, it cannot be the only solution for the current crisis that we're dealing with.
Once again, you're listening to Street Beat. It's me, Tony B., your host. I'm talking with Liz Huizar, Executive Director of Southeast Seattle Education Coalition. We're talking about some changes happening in the public school system. I just found out from Liz, a $94 million deficit. What is this going to look like? What is this going to mean? We're going to get some more answers to these questions. But first, Liz, I want to talk a little bit about you, your background, so that folks know who you are in sharing this information. Executive Director of Southeast Seattle Education Coalition. What do you do? And tell us a little bit about your background.
So as executive director, my role is in helping us steward the mission that we have forward. And so our mission is to convene and resource communities of color to advocate for education equity. And for me, this is like purpose and passion coming together. I'm the daughter of immigrants, first generation college student. And I know how my parents struggled in a system that was difficult to navigate. They didn't speak English. They learned, where and how to ask for different resources. And that has all stayed with me as I frame my work here, right? We think about information being accessible to everyone, when in reality, it's made for mainstream communities, and that doesn't always include everyone. And so part of what I hope in my work I can do is bring resources more accessibly to the communities we serve, so that they're empowered to say, hey, that's not what we need or what we want right now. Actually, this is what we need. And so in our coalition, we listen to things that work and strategies that better serve students, and then say, make sure you're looking at this and replicating it, making sure that we're putting this in our education system.
Okay, now, as we share this information, again, hyper-focusing on Southeast Seattle, and you mentioned that there was more advocacy in North Seattle. On the one hand, people might say, well, does that mean the folks in Southeast Seattle are apathetic about education? Why has there not been more energy since we have Southeast Coalition, we have these advocacy groups? I know that folks in Southeast Seattle are highly concerned about the education that our youths are receiving. And so what do you say to that?
One of the things I say is that the school district is not doing enough community engagement that they need to be doing. So as groups are wanting to elevate their perspective from this region, there is no forums for them to officially come into and say, hey, here's what we're thinking, or here's what we're seeing. Main avenues of communication right now have been school board meetings, which are at a difficult time, 4 p.m. You have to sign up for it. It's challenging as a working parent or, just as a person to sign on at a certain time and be able to show up to a school board meeting in SOTO. And, so when you create spaces that already have barriers to them, are you thinking critically about who is not able to access those? And I would say from Seattle Public Schools, they're aware that there's an issue of community engagement, and yet they do not come back to do anything differently. And so that aspect. The other aspect is there is a fatigue of feedback. Many advocacy groups have been advocating for similar issues, generation across generation, grandparents asking for this, parents asking for this, and now young people asking. And to some extent, you think, well, when is this going to actually change? Are you listening to what we're saying? And so in taking that sentiment forward, it's like we need to make sure that we're responsive first to these groups, and then it's not to say that North End parents can't communicate or can't ask questions and can't also give their opinions, but are you making space for folks who have not who are not showing up to a school board meeting? Are you making space for folks who aren't able to navigate the website? I would say not enough.
All right. And then there's also language barriers.
Absolutely.
That go into, okay, and which news resources are trusted resources,
Exactly.
how you reach community. You can't, in this community, do a one-size-fits-all awareness campaign. It just is what it is.
Exactly.
So you would think that the Seattle public school system would be aware of that. But anyway.
that is our critique in the letter. And one of the places that we want to critique and we want to be constructive. And as we gathered different community partners to put out this very strong statement, this is where we are solution oriented. We are offering suggestions on how we believe authentic community engagement can occur. And so now we say to Seattle Public Schools, we've offered suggestions and we've offered to continue partnering with you all. What is your all's next move?
All right. Again, you're listening to Street Beat. It's me, Tony B. My guest again, Liz Huizar, Executive Director of Southeast Seattle Education Coalition. School closures. Schools are going to close. We just found out some information now that's, it was potentially 21.
It was 21 at the beginning of it, sometime in September. There were two plans. Option A would close 21 schools. Option B would have closed 17 schools.
Now, if you're saying to yourself, I didn't know anything about this, you're not alone. And you're hearing Liz talk about the lack of awareness in Southeast Seattle. Not necessarily our fault. You as parents, don't blame yourself. It's just we're a hard community to reach. And so this is part of what this effort is. If you're tuning in, $94 million deficit, 4 schools specifically closing. Liz, I did think I heard you say none in Southeast Seattle. We can be confident about that.
The 4 schools that are closing are North Beach, Sacagawea, Stevens, and Stanislaus.
Okay, and those are all
elementary
K through 5?
Yes.
K through 5 schools.
Correct.
$94 million deficit. How is that going to impact? And I'm hyper-focused on South Seattle schools, but we do have folks who listen in Ballard and Lake City and Magnolia. How is that going to impact the education that our youth will receive? Does that mean teachers are not going to be available? Does that mean curriculum is going to be? Tell us, we don't know. But $94 million deficit is what we're facing. What's the deal?
Yeah, I think definitely in part it's understanding why this deficit exists. And so as I've shared, this is about we're spending more than revenue coming into the district. And one of the things that we must know is that enrollment in Seattle has been declining for a number of years. We have less students in the school district, and the way funding comes into a school building is based on how many students are in the building, which then goes into teacher, facilities, programs, etc. And looking at why that is one of the key necessities right now. We have some estimated guesses on why there's less students in the school district, but we don't actually have a comprehensive report on why families are leaving Seattle Public Schools. There's assumptions that folks are leaving to private schools, and that is definitely a piece of this. But we also have families who can no longer afford to live in this city who are having to move into South King County and even beyond. So this is a housing issue as much as it is an institutional education issue. And then there's the other part of, because of pandemic and just because of where we're at, the cost of operating school buildings is so much higher than it was just maybe even 5 years ago. Insurance costs more, utilities cost more. So all of these bills that we as working families face in our own homes, these are the same things school buildings are also facing. And so to have more in detail of why this exists can help us think through, well, how do we actually find ways to solve this that don't have such negative impact on our students?
Mm-hmm. So I mentioned this open letter. Mm-hmm. Tell me about this open letter, who it was meant to serve, and what was in it.
Yeah. So we have been watching this issue since the summer of 23, when conversations first started from the school district with community on what they called a well-resourced school vision. And this is all jargon.
A well-resourced school.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to let you continue. Yeah. But so when you say that, I just want, what does that mean? Because that could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Exactly. What's the general meaning of a well-resourced school? When I hear that, it means a school that is meeting the needs of a particular community, whatever those needs happen to be.
Right. And I would say that is part of our critique, that there was no clear definition on what that meant. We just started using this terminology as a way to move folks in a certain direction. And so I would say 100% to what you said, with the understanding that, you know, there is more need for communities that serve high populations of students of color, and that's where we need to start versus, well, my school that serves, 100 students is okay and leave our school alone. That's in this argument, that's not, we can't end the argument there. We have to really think about our school serving our entire community, not just my kid, but our entire young student population. And so in 23, summer of 23, these meetings are held throughout the city, and the superintendent announces that no schools will close in the current school year that we are. However, please note that we will be looking at what this means in the future. And so they went back for a year to try to figure things out internally, not really engaging with community, trying to, I'm sure look at data and make a decision as to what school buildings they would close. At that moment, we as SESEC, as Southeast Seattle Education Coalition, are watching to see what emerges, because we would be having a very different conversation right now if there was disproportionate impact on Southeast Seattle communities. Once we saw the data that went in to inform how they were thinking about reducing this deficit, we knew that we needed to, it wasn't, oh, you are not serving Southeast Seattle, but rather, how do we move forward to make sure our communities are not left behind? And that's what our letter really centers around. We are not saying don't close schools at all. And we're also understanding that tough decisions have to be made. Mm-hmm. And so how do we make decisions that center students at the forefront and that are not just, this is what my kid needs, but rather, what does our region need? What do our young people need to better emerge into community leaders? And so we knew that this message had to come from a collective, and that's what we are, a coalition of partners who serve BIPOC community in the region, and by making sure they were informed, they can then go inform the folks they serve, and then we can ensure that information is actually coming to the individuals that it needs to come to, and not just folks with access to the web page that explained everything. Mm-hmm.
And I know folks are busy out there, and you're working 2 jobs, and you have big, but there is also, in my opinion, a personal responsibility that people have to take to find information. It's not easy. So for folks out there who are going, whoa, wait a minute, let's just take this at 2 points. I need to find out more information about what's going on, because that's probably the first step. And then there are folks out there who are going to say, you know what, if I knew what was going on, I'd be engaged and involved and activating. But what do I do? So let's take that from that perspective. First of all, folks may be saying, I'm just hearing about this. This is obviously something that has been going on in meetings for a while. Where can I find out information? Why am I just hearing about it? And then the other part of it again, okay, what can I do as a parent of a child in the Seattle public school system to make sure my voice is heard? and that this well-resourced school is well-resourced based off of what I think my child needs, because that's how people are going to look at it. There's the overall picture, and I'm thinking we don't want the minimum standard to be, well, this is a well-resourced school. You barely have enough, because we also want our kids to thrive and excel.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, in part, I would say, even listening to this and starting to like really understand what's going on is like number one, right? I know many of us are already plugged into spaces where we have trust with different organizations. Maybe your students are part of an after-school program, or maybe you go to a church community. These are spaces where we want to put information in front so that the responsibility is not just families to pursue information, but rather the district needs to come into these spaces and needs to do the work to put this in front of us. And right now, that is where we are strongly advocating and saying, you know, don't just send the email blast and think you're done, your hands are clean. More needs to happen, because we cannot just place this on families. Families, as you said, are working, have all kinds of responsibilities. So I would say continue to plug into the spaces that you already have trust and rapport, organizations where you are, going to community events or after school programs that are serving you, and ask questions, and then they can help navigate some of that advocacy for you. And at the same time, we are here working to say, make sure you're bringing this information forward. And we as an organization are not doing it alone. Rather, we're the coalition support to be able to bring that to wherever you are already participating.
Okay, we're almost out of time. And part of that other question was quickly, what can we do?
What can we do? Again, continue to elevate questions in the spaces that you already participate in. Find other parents, and as a collective, come into these different spaces. We're hosting webinars, we're hosting community meetings, and we will continue to engage with folks to be able to share this information. And so just have this in top of mind, and keep asking questions in whatever formal spaces you can.
All right, again, my guest is Liz Huizar. We're talking about Seattle Public School closures. Liz, we're almost out of time, but I want to give you 30 seconds or so for final words that you'd like to share with our audience right now.
We are committed to making sure that this is not siloed, that this decision happens with us and not, at us. And so just know that advocacy around school closures is our present issue, but advocacy for us in education will continue beyond this one issue. So come join us whenever you can at SESEC Spaces.
And I appreciate the work that you're doing and that all the partners are doing. This is coming from me to the parents. You got to take a personal interest in this as well. I know that there's a lot going on, but I appreciate you saying that you're going to. But parents, you have to take personal issue this as well. Liz, thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing this information. We will stay in touch and keep our community informed about what's going on, and take that extra step, because again, we do realize that folks have a lot going on, and it's kind of a crazy time in the world right now. So there's just a lot to do. Again, I want to remind everyone that tomorrow will be open for the Halloween Haunted Theater. You'll hear the history of the Columbia City Haunted Theater, and you'll get to tour the building on Saturday from 11 to 1. And I think that someone from Southeast Seattle Education Coalition will be here with some information tomorrow too that they'll be handing out. Right? Is that right? Okay, so that'll be going on as well. On Saturday, the fentanyl awareness meeting that'll be taking place here 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. If you can't make it down, don't worry. We're going to be broadcasting and streaming that event across all of our broadcast networks as well. So, but you can come down, and if you have questions and you want to share your stories, you'll be okay to do that as well. And then on 5th of January, Tuesday from 6 to 9, it will be, that's election day, and we'll be broadcasting and sharing information and giving you updates on elections happening here locally in Seattle, King County, and around the state, and of course nationally as well. That's it. That's all the time that I have. That's going to do it for the kid. It's me, Tony B, your host of Street Beat, saying, remember, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you can't, you're probably right. I'm out.